Hello, this is Mr. Reynolds, and we're going to look at muscle tissue today. There's three different muscle tissues that you'll see slides of, and you have to know things about. There's skeletal, visceral, which is also known as smooth muscle tissue. That's commonly called smooth muscle tissue. Visceral you encountered before when visceral pericardium, visceral pleura. That was the membrane touching whichever organ it was talking about, whichever cavity. So visceral means internal. Cardiac is muscle tissue that's found only in the heart, and they didn't know about it first of all. It looked a lot like this, so they thought there were just these two types, skeletal and visceral, and that was it. Then eventually they found, oh hey, this cardiac. This is a different one. We find it only in the heart, so let's call it cardiac. Okay. The skeletal muscle tissue attaches to all the bones in the body, the skeleton. Like I said, visceral or smooth. And they pretty much named it by the way it looks, as you will see. Okay. And we know that the one big deal with muscle tissue is that it can contract. No other tissues can do that. Okay. Now remember, tissues are a bunch of different cells coming together. All right, moving on. Okay, this slide, this is a nice one that you can refer back to as you need to. You see the three types. You see skeletal muscle tissue, smooth muscle tissue, and cardiac muscle tissue. Back with just the regular muscle tissue, remember we said this is the only one that can contract. Muscle tissue can contract. Okay. Now, also, unlike any other tissues and cells, they will refer to almost everybody. The books, they'll refer to muscle tissue as muscle fibers. It's I guess an older way of saying that's stuck and it's going to keep sticking. When we look at the skeletal muscle fiber, it's going to look like a long strand shaped, okay, or it's going to or a fiber. So that's where the name first came from, I would imagine, and that is just stuck. So even though they'll say fat cell, bone cell, cartilage cell, any other type of cell, pretty much when it comes to a muscle cell, it's usually described as a muscle fiber. Okay, so if you hear muscle fiber, that's really talking about muscle cells. Okay. All right, next slide. Okay, the first type is going to be skeletal muscle tissue, skeletal muscle fibers, and like this cell, I like it when there's the artist depiction of it and there's actual photograph. I think it's really neat comparing those. So that's kind of what we have here. In this top photograph, notice it's a long row. And these fibers, these are all different strands, okay? There's 1, 2, 3. They're all different ones, and they're arranged in parallel rows, okay? That's very, very significant for skeletal muscle fiber. An older name is this. It used to be called striated muscle tissue. Striated muscle tissue, okay? Because of these up and down striations that you see in it. And this banding pattern, this is due to some of the microfilaments, their arrangement in the muscle fiber. Okay, that's why we get these banding patterns, which they call striations. Okay, or striated muscle tissue. Okay, so one thing, it's got striations. A second thing is that it's in long parallel rows. Okay, okay, I'm on now. All right, a third thing is that if you look at these, here's a nucleus, a nucleus, a nucleus, a nucleus, nuclei in here, a bunch of these dark things. So this is maybe the only tissue in the body that is multinucleated. Okay, more than one nucleus, more than one control center. All right. A fourth thing is that we have conscious control over this. Okay, if it's connected to our bones, like what I'm doing right now, I'm picking up a pin because I wanted to do that, and the different muscles contract, allowing me to do that. That is called voluntary control, or that these muscles are voluntary muscles because we can will them to do that. Okay. Okay, back again. Before we leave this slide, again, here's a look at a muscle fiber, which is one muscle cell. So I'm going to put, so basically muscle fiber is going to be referring to a muscle cell. Okay. All right, next slide. If you just look at it, you can see that, oh, hey, let's look at one over here. You can see it's got one nucleus, and the cell kind of comes to more of a point, okay? A little chunkier in the middle, and then comes to a point. All right, clean this up a little bit. All right, so looking at it under a microscope, you don't see any of the striations like we saw before, okay? You don't see any of the up and down striations on it, so it looks like it's smooth underneath the microscope. So hence smooth muscle tissue. And like I said, the formal name is visceral muscle tissue. Again, it can contract. If it's attached to something here and attached to something there and it contracts, it's going to be pulling these things in. Okay. It is, as you can tell, it is mononucleated. So it's got only one nucleus. It's no striations. It's not long parallel rows. It's just a shorter cell that comes to pointed ends on it. And we don't have conscious control over this. You think visceral is going to mean internal. So this is around all your everything in your digestive system. Okay, once you swallow something, you can't stop it. You got 25, 6, 7, 8 feet of intestines, small and large intestines, for this to go through, and you don't even think about it until it's coming out the other end on it. You don't think about it at all, but there's visceral muscle tissue around it, surrounding every length of that digestive system, contracting and pushing it on. It's kind of like if you had a long balloon, your hand around it, and you squeezed in with your hand. Those are some circular muscles, okay, that would be pushing the food on, right? So that's smooth muscle tissue. We do not have conscious control over it, so it's considered to be involuntary. We cannot control this. Okay, we might be able to get some to relax, but we don't have conscious control over this. Okay, the third and last type of muscle tissue is the cardiac muscle tissue. And like we mentioned before, it's found only in the heart. It was the third one of these found. At first, since as you can tell, it has striations, as you can see. It has some of the up and down strands. So at first, they thought it was skeletal muscle tissue, is what they thought. And then they found out that they were wrong because, then they found these intercalated discs when they looked closely, which is the cell membrane. Let's do this one here on the left. The cell membrane of this one over here on the left. Here's this nucleus, here's the cell membrane. And then the cell membrane of this one would come together and it would thicken up. Okay, and that's what the intercalated disc is. Okay, it's two of the cell membranes right next to each other, and then a little more thickening. Okay, and that is found only in cardiac muscle tissue. So that's a telltale thing. As you can tell, there's one nucleus. Once they could identify the intercalated disc, the microscopes got a little better and they could identify it. Then they said, oh, wait a minute, it's not multinucleated. This is just one nucleus. This is just one nucleus per cell. Interesting. Okay, and it's got striations. They found that nowhere else. So they came up with the third type, cardiac muscle tissue, found only in the heart. All right, so things we said, it has striations. Has striations. It's found only in the heart. And even though we can relax and slow the heartbeat down and get it really, really slow, or get excited and it speeds up, but we can't stop it. So technically it is considered an involuntary muscle. Okay, so cardiac muscle tissue is involuntary. And also we said just one nucleus per cell, so it's also mononucleated. Okay, that's muscle tissue. It can contract. This is a nice springboard into actually a couple different things. We can look at cardiac muscle tissue in the heart. We can look at skeletal muscle tissue also. So this is a valuable lesson on this. You have some questions in your OneNote asking you to differentiate between these. Thank you very much. Cardiac muscle tissue, and it is